So this is a Clash of Kings. Not bad. I had fun reading this book. Now, obviously, the MVP of this book has to be Tyrion Lannister. He is, as of right now, my favorite character. I don't know why he feels the need to avenge Ned Stark by punishing some of the people that were involved in his execution. Janis Slint and Pycelle, but I respect it. So Tyrion, as of right now, is the goat. He takes charge of the battle at the Blackwater. There's where he loses his nose. The problem with the Blackwater battle, there are too many pointless details for me as a reader. I do not need to know all the names of all the ships. I do not need to know who the captains are of these ships. I do not need to know how many men each ship has and how many oars and so forth. So I don't need all of those details. That's a bit excessive. It is a time waster. To me, as a reader, that part was probably the worst part to read. It was a chore, right? And another thing with Tyrion. So in the previous book, A Game of Thrones, we know that none of the direwolves like him. They growl at him, which shows that he has a darkness, right? Now in this book, this is proven true when Tyrion, in a way, threatens to have Tommen, you know, he threatens Cersei that if something happens to Shay, then Tyrion will have Tommen get, let's say, tickled somewhere that isn't that pleasant to be tickled, right? And then he says that he will do it himself, all right. And the what shocked me in this scene is how easily he just says it. Like there is no hesitation, there is no a moment to reconsider or a moment to really understand that that he is talking about his nephew basically, right? And as we know, Tommen is basically innocent in all of this, right? He and Marcella are probably the only two kids in the Lannisters that are, let's call it, normal, right? So this scene shows how uh, Tyrion has his dark side and that he isn't really bothered by it because he says so easily that he will have Tommen tickled, and he might do it himself if Cersei does anything to Shay, right? Yeah, that scene was tremendous, right? Because it shows that he has no, let's call it an inner battle with his dark side. I think he has accepted it as part of him, and he doesn't really realize when he switches from the Tyrion we all know and love, and then the darker Tyrion, right? A big problem that I have in a Clash of Kings is that the serious underuse of Jon Snow. Jon Snow's chapters are, let's not call them boring, but his chapters in A Clash of Kings, they are extremely banal, extremely, what's the word? I mean, he is underused and it shows, which shouldn't really happen because he is a main character, and all he does in his chapters in this book is his traveling in the north with his, crows of the Night's Watch. They stop, they eat, they make fires, they sleep, they walk some more, they make more fires, he makes Mormont's dinner, and that's pretty much it. And then they encounter some wildlings. He lets Ygritte go, and then he has to kill Corin Halfhand and join the wildlings, and that's basically his entire arc in this book, Clash of Kings, and it is extremely disappointing to me that Jon. I mean, the weakest link in this Clash of Kings is Jon Snow's chapters. Everything else has something that pops off, something that happens, something that keeps you engaged. But when it comes to Jon Snow, it's just it is a tragedy and a travesty because in the show Jon Snow was one of my favorites along with Tyrion, and in this book he is just plain. That is the perfect exact word to describe his chapters. Absolutely plain and disappointing. Right? Okay, listen. We're gonna talk about Theon Greyjoy for a second. Now, I want to make this clear. I understand why Theon is doing what he is doing. I sympathize with him, but that does not mean that I forgive all of his vile acts and crimes. But I understand why he feels the need, why he is pressured to do what he does. And we all know what he does at Winterfell. Okay, I feel sorry for the guy. Um, and I have to underline this. I mean, his family, the Greyjoys, and all the people of the Iron Islands. I mean, they're trash, bro. They belong to the streets. They're trash. They are all talk, right? They are all talk, and I mean, they are probably one of the worst families in this series so far, right? They start a rebellion against Robert Baratheon. They get crushed by Robert and Eddie Stark, right? And then they take Theon, a 10-year-old boy, as a prisoner, uh, and they threaten when if Balon Greyjoy does any more shit, then Ed Stark has to execute Theon, right? So Theon is taken to Winterfell. He is raised there as one of their own. He is not treated as a prisoner, right? So the Starks are a better family. They treat him better than the Greyjoys and the people of the Iron Islands, right? And we get a few hints from Theon's monologues, I mean, the only person in Winterfell that actually treated him like an equal or a brother or a friend or a comrade, that person was Robb, right? Everybody else pretty much accepted him, but they were a bit cold. And of course, Catelyn and especially Eddie Stark. I mean, Theon says that he kept Theon at a distance, and it makes sense because if anything happened, then Eddie was the one that had to decapitate Theon. So of course he would keep Theon at a distance, not get too close to him because. So again, I understand completely why Theon does the horrible things that he does. I don't forgive him, but I understand why he feels that he has to do this. But of course, the tragedy of his character is that he is mistaken. Okay, the Greyjoys are not his family. He is not a Greyjoy. Okay, the Starks are his family. Winterfell and the North are his family, and he is a Stark because they treated him better than his own blood. Okay, and to showcase how trashy the Greyjoy family is and the people of the Iron Islands, Theon goes back, sent by Robb, yada yada, to make an alliance, and pretty much nobody notices Theon. They ignore him, they treat him like he's nobody, even though he is the legal heir to the Iron Islands. His sister treats him like trash. His uncles treat him like trash. His own father, Balon, treats him like trash. They call him a wolf. And it's so hypocritical because they put on all the blame on Theon, even though this situation he is in is because of his family. Okay, especially because of Balon and all of his brothers. That is why Theon is in the precarious position that he is. He has no blame in this situation. It's all because of his family and how trashy his family is. And being hypocritical the way they are, they put all the blame on Theon. I mean, this guy was a 10-year-old boy. He was kidnapped. I mean, he was taken by the Starks. All of his other brothers were killed in the rebellion, and then 10 years later he has to go back to his family, and his family treats him like absolute trash, right? Even though his family is responsible for Theon being taken for 10 years, right? Like, what did the Greyjoys and Balon and his sister and all of these uncles expected? Because he was a kid, right? And when he comes back, he has all of these great expectations. Finally, I'm with my own kin. My family is going to be so overjoyed, and they treat him like a stranger. Well, whose fault is that, though? Right? The hypocrisy of these Greyjoy people and the Iron Islands, right? And Balon and his sister, it's just infuriating. It's just infuriating. And listen, because of how they treat him when he comes back is why Theon reacts the way that he does. He takes over Winterfell. He makes it seem like he has killed Bran and Rickon, and then Ramsay Bolton comes along, and we know what happens afterwards, right? So all of this is because the tragedy that befalls Theon is because the way his Greyjoy and his people treat him when he comes back, right? So the Greyjoys, as of right now, and the people of the Iron Islands, they belong to the streets. They're trash. Fuck them, right? Now, the highlight and the most interesting part in A Clash of Kings, of course, has to do with Dany and the House of the Undying. Now, this is a very important and mysterious event that happens in this book. And of course, some of the visions that she has, they can be explained quite easily, but others are too complicated, right? And what happens in the House of the Undying after she drinks the ayahuasca? They tell him go to the right, go up, but that really doesn't happen. There are only doors to the left. She has to go down. There are all these people that make promises, etc., etc. But in the end, she manages and she escapes, right? And there's one scene in particular that really caught my eye, which is she has a vision of probably Rhaegar and his wife. Probably it might be Lyanna, it might be what's her face, the Martell, right? And then they're holding a child, and the woman says, would you sing him a song? And Rhaegar says he already has the Song of Ice and Fire. He was the prince that was promised, blah, blah, blah. And then Rhaegar looks at Daenerys, and it seems like Rhaegar sees Daenerys. But that might not be the case. This scene in particular, and pretty much the entire House of the Undying scene, it's so convoluted, so complex that there might be red herrings all over the place, and distractions and diversions and double entendres. We don't really know what's really happening here, right? You know, what's really happening? What's really happening here, right? Because it seems like Dany is a special case, because even in her visions, you know, whoever calls her Mother of Dragons, Destroyer of Lies, Mother of Death, Mother of whatever, right? So she seems to be extremely special. She has all of these visions with these, let's call them entities that are of different colors, right? So she seems to be a very special case. She seems to be the glitch in the system. She seems to be the fish out of water. She seems to be above the rest for some strange and inexplicable reason, right? And she hatches the dragons. Magic seems to come back into the world because of this, and there's really no explanation why she, just because she exists, doesn't explain why she has this effect on everything else and on magic itself, right? And I've watched a lot of theory videos. I mean, she might be a red herring, but if she is not, right, if she is not Rhaegar's, if she turns out to be Ned's and Ashara Dane's or whatever, then why all of this magic around her? It doesn't explain why all of this magic and all of these events and all of these prophetic visions keep, you know, swirling around her. It doesn't make any sense. She has to be somebody important. She cannot be just a red herring, right? And I have to say this, and I think I mentioned this in a Game of Thrones. Okay, let's just say that Jon Snow is the heir to the Iron Throne. You know, story-wise, in terms of the narrative, it would make sense why. It would make sense why, you know, some of these characters did what they did to protect the secret from Robert Baratheon and other people. Jon is apparently Rhaegar's and Lyanna's child. He is the heir, allegedly. And in terms of the narrative, it makes sense why, you know, Ned and allegedly other people, Arthur Dane, Hightower, they would make this conspiracy to hide Jon's true identity. But to me as a reader, you know, to me as a reader, it's just not enough for Jon to be the heir, and all of this happens, all of this tragedy, all of these wars, yada yada, because, and all of these deaths, because Jon is the heir and Ned had to protect him. It seems simplistic, too simplistic, right? There should be more than just he is the true heir, the true child of Rhaegar and Lyanna, and if people found out, then he would get killed. So Ned and others had to hide his identity as a bastard, right? Story-wise, that makes sense, but to me as a reader, that is too simplistic. It doesn't make any real sense. There has to be something else. It has to be a more sophisticated secret, right? But that's just me. Not much else happens in this Clash of Kings, right? Stannis finally shows up. He apparently loses the battle at Blackwater. He uses blood magic and Melisandre to kill Renly. And that scene to me was just peculiar because okay, so apparently from my reading of that scene, so Caitlyn sees something. I don't know why. Apparently Brienne doesn't notice the shadow baby devil thing, but apparently, Caitlyn actually saw the thing as it killed Renly. Now, why would that be? Why would she be able to see that shadow baby? Because she is a Tully. We know that the Starks have some crazy magic, right? Apparently, but the Tullys, not really, right? And it's interesting because at this moment, Stannis is a bit too OP because in this book alone he uses the Shadow Baby twice through Melisandre to kill his opposition. So apparently it takes King's blood, right? And this would make sense why he was so obsessed with getting his hands on Edric Storm, right? Because he is Robert's bastard. So there might be some sacrifice coming, right? But my question is how often, how frequent can he use this Melisandre's power to assassinate his rivals, right? Because we understand right away that after Renly's assassination, Stannis had nightmares. He seemed extremely tired, older, worn, withered. So this using this blood magic takes a toll on Stannis. Melisandre seems otherwise to be fine. So the question is how often he can use this power, and if he needs King's blood, how many times can he use it? And do you need exclusively King's blood to use it, right? Okay, this has to be one of my favorite scenes in the book. I almost forgot about it. You know, Arya and Jack and Hagar. Okay, this is Jack and Hagar is interesting. Okay, Jack and Hagar is the correct kind of mysterious guy that I approve of, right? So Jaqen makes a deal with Arya. He has to kill 3 people because Arya saved him and the other 2 from the fire. And Jaqen kills 2 people, right? That were bothering Arya. But when it comes to the third name, Arya says Jack and Hagar, right? And this is very interesting. Especially, okay, we're gonna make a reference to the TV show. In the TV show, when Arya calls Jaqen Hagar's name, I mean Jaqen is he shook, my guy. He is petrified. Like the actor did a amazing job in portraying that. Oh shit, right? He was out of it, right? And it's very it's interesting that a guy that is on one level, he might be a faceless assassin, maybe. On the other hand, some theories might say that he might be some actually the faceless god or some god, right? But yet, as in the book, as in the show, Jack and Hagar, he is scared, right? This guy is confident. He exudes confidence. He is charming. He is the silent type. He doesn't seem to be afraid of anything, right? But when Arya mentions his name, his eyes widen, right? He is caught off guard, and it seems like he would have gone through with it if Arya hadn't, taken his name back. So I really love that scene. I think it is very telling it is very telling to me that Jaqen H'ghar is not a god, because he wouldn't have been so afraid. And I mean, can a god commit suicide? This pegs the question. If Jaqen is the faceless god, then I mean, in the book, he was ready to stab himself. So that's pretty much it. The war, it's still continuing in this book. Uh, Rob doesn't really make an appearance, if I remember correctly, which is unfortunate. We get Catelyn's perspective, which is unfortunate. Uh, we have a little chat with Jamie. But it seems like Rob is winning every battle. Uh, Stannis gets defeated easily. Apparently, um, Tywin and the Tyrells, they save King's Landing. So we'll see where the war takes from here, where it goes. And I have a problem with Sansa in this book. Every time we have Sansa's perspective, every time she opens her mouth and angers Joffrey, I just get frustrated. I'm just like, shut up, Sansa. Shut up, Sansa. You don't want to piss off this crazy little bitch. Okay? It doesn't make sense why she keeps on opening her mouth and contradicting Joffrey when she knows that Joffrey is an unhinged psycho, a soy boy, right? Every time she opens her mouth, Joffrey, being the little bitch that he is, he orders a knight to beat her ass, basically. And it's getting old. She needs to learn to shut up, right? And another thing, right? Another thing with Sansa. Why is this Sir Dantos trying so hard to, get her out of King's Landing? It doesn't make sense that this drunkard, he seems like a simpleton, basically. Why would he risk everything to rescue Sansa? Something's going on here behind the scenes. And Dantos mentions a lot of times that it seems that he implies that other people are working behind the scenes to, save Sansa from Joffrey and get her out of King's Landing, right? Because, of course, this guy, from the way he appears to be, isn't a real, tactician or a mastermind. So it's obvious that somebody else is pulling his strings. And we find out that the decision has been made to rescue Sansa when Joffrey and Marjorie get married, and we know what will happen at the Purple Wedding, right? But my question is, who has arrived at this decision to save Sansa on Joffrey's wedding day, right? Who is scheming behind the scenes here? It's obviously not Dantos, obviously, right? Who is it that is trying to get Sansa out, and who will poison Joffrey at his own wedding, right? So it might be Littlefinger, it might be Varys. Some theories might speculate that it might be actually Tywin himself. Uh, Varys, Littlefinger, Tywin. In the in the show it was Olenna Tyrell, right? So I'm waiting for this revelation. Who is really pulling the strings here? Is it Varys? Is it Littlefinger? Is it Tywin? Is it the Tyrells? Who's trying to kill Joffrey? For real, who's trying to kill Joffrey? I'll probably end it with this. Um, I don't understand why Tyrion is so captivated by Shay, for whatever reason, right? I don't understand why Tyrion would risk so much bringing her in King's Landing, because we know that Tywin expressly commanded him not to bring one of his hoes to King's Landing, or he would see to it, right? So it doesn't make sense. Uh, Tyrion knows that Tywin is serious. Uh, he has the Tysha experience to back up the fact that Tywin will solve this situation for him, and he brings Shay to King's Landing anyway, which makes him vulnerable, right? Cersei has Shay, right? She uses her as blackmail, and then Tyrion uses Tommen as blackmail, and this seems like a situation that could have been avoided by Tyrion, but he, for some reason, I mean, he is Hand of the King, he, and yet he risks it all for this Shay, and it doesn't make any sense to me. Right? It doesn't make any sense to me. He says it himself that Shay is only interested in his gold, and yet he risks so much for her, and she doesn't give a shit. Right? She doesn't give a shit. And this was hilarious to me. After the end of the Blackwater battle, all of these people that survived are given all sorts of rewards and gifts and what have you, right? All these people that probably didn't really, let's say, weren't brave, right? But they are given rewards, they are given laurels, and so forth. They are acclaimed. Tyrion is still in his coma because of the incident with his nose, right? But from what I understand, I mean, Tyrion led the battle, right? He led the battle. He was with his men. He inspired his men. And from what I understand, it is implied that he gets no reward, no acclaim, no respect. I mean, it seems to me that it is implied that he is not even responsible for standing up to Stannis, right? So his achievements in this battle, from a tactical standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, and even from a battle standpoint, he actually went on the battlefield. All of that is completely ignored, unacknowledged, and it's a sad thing to see because Tyrion is an amazing character, right? And it shows just how meek and pathetic, Joffrey and Cersei and even Tywin are. Because they were obviously the ones that made this decision to completely ignore Tyrion's achievements, right? And even at the end of the book, Tywin comes back and then he becomes Hand of the King, and of course now Tyrion isn't even Hand of the King. So, yeah, that's a sad thing to see. But that's about it with this. This was a Clash of Kings. I enjoyed it, and I hope that Jon Snow gets better in A Storm of Swords because he has to get better. I'm tired of him just walking around in the snow with his direwolf, and he has to improve as a character. You know, he has to improve, and that's about it. See ya.